took my son to a screening at Sony. And I mean, it's one thing I've seen myself on screen many times because I've done umpteen TV series when I lived in England and interviews on TV. So it's not surprise, you know, even though I myself played myself in another movie called 20 Dates. And so it wasn't that big a thing for me to see Brian Cox do me. But imagine what it'd be like for a son to see his father portrayed, you know, in a major motion picture. And so he came out of the screening, and I said, Paul, what'd you think? And he said, Dad, he nailed you. That whole thing came about. I was in my office one day working, and the phone rang, and it was a producer, Ed Saxon, calling from New York, with a very apologetic tone, saying, this is the most embarrassing phone call I've ever had to make. I don't know what to do, but here's the situation. There's a screenwriter named Charlie Kaufman. He's written a screenplay, and he's made you a character in it, and he has freely quoted from your lectures and quoted from your book without permission, without copyright. We don't know what to do. I said, well, send it to me. I'll read it, and I'll give you a sense of what I think. And so I read it, and I saw what he needed to do. He was trying to write this film about the worst case of writer's block in history, and he needed an antagonist, and he needed somebody to represent Hollywood in an antagonistic way, but a way that would cut both ways. And so we had twin brothers, and one loves my book and is writing a huge action piece with great success. The other struggling to make an independent film. And this is the inner conflict in Charlie Kaufman and many writer-directors like him, how to make a commercial art movie, okay? And so he needed my character to have something to push against. The third act of that script was awful. He just ran out of ideas. It was really awful. And so I called Ed Saxon back, and I said, first I called William Goldman. And I said, Bill, they're making a movie, or they're trying to make a movie, and they've made me a character in it. What should I do? He said, don't do it. I said, why not? He said, because it's Hollywood. He said, if they're out to get you, they'll get you. I said, but, you know, I said, but I'm going to get control over the casting. He said, okay, let's say you got control over the casting. Who do you want? I said, Gene Hackman. He said, fine. It'll be Gene Hackman with big bows, purple bows around his neck, whatever. If they're going to get you, Bob, they're going to get you. Don't do it. So then I called my son, and I said, Paul, and I told him, and he said, Dad, do it. I said, but William Goldman says they could satirize me. He says, so what? He says, you're going to be a character in a major motion picture. What difference does it make? And so I thought about it, and I thought, if it's done with humor, if it gets a laugh, I said, I know I'm a controversial person, and so I called Ed back, and I said, if we have fun, and I'll play his villain for him. I said, but two things. One, I have to have a say in the casting. Two, the third act sucks, and I can't be a character in a bad movie. Three, I want my redeeming scene. And so they agreed to all of that, and so we had many, many meetings over the Act 3 problems, so it got to a point where I would finally agree. And then, of course, there's my redeeming scene in the bar, which becomes a pivotal scene. I think Charlie understood from that scene that even McKee couldn't help him. And that's why Donald writes Act 3. And if you watch the film carefully, you realize that Charlie's character only writes the first two acts. And then he brings Donald in from Hollywood, and Act 3 is Donald's version of an Act 3, right? And then I asked for a list of the actors that they were thinking of casting, And they gave me a list, surprisingly, because see, I didn't know whether this could be the Dan Aykroyd, Danny DeVito school of casting, right? But the list they gave me was the top 10 middle-aged British actors alive, from Christopher Plummer to Michael Caine, and on that list was Brian Cox. And I said, start there, ask him, and they didn't even know who he was. The casting director knew, of course, but I said, he's the best British actor you don't know. And Brian's a friend of mine. And he was a student of mine up in Glasgow. And I know Brian's work. And Brian would not sentimentalize me. Other actors, I couldn't be sure, because actors love to be loved. And so while they're going down the poor screenwriter's throat in that lecture scene, an actor like Christopher Plummer or somebody would also put up, but I'm doing it for the right reasons, some kind of, and I didn't want that, because that's an idiotic question. And he deserves deserves to be answered in that tone of voice so that he gets it, that the notion that there's no conflict, that real life is without conflict, is the most naive, ridiculous thought a person can have. I mean, right now, you and I are in this interview full of conflict as we're sorting out ideas and trying to make this work, whatever. I said that. So anyway, so I didn't want to be sentimentalized, because I don't lecture that way. I don't want to be loved. I want them to love the art. I want them to learn from me and love the art. But I don't want groupies. I don't want to be loved. And so I knew Brian would do that. He'd give that kind of edge to it, and he was great. So my answer to the question is, I thought it was wonderful. I loved it.